Alright guys, welcome back. So we are currently on the final part of Chapter 8, Section 7. And today we're going to focus on these two parts here, which is finding complex numbers and finding powers of I. So, dividing complex numbers. So anytime we do this, the first thing we want to do is we want to get rid of this situation here in the denominator. So what do? We multiply by the conjugate. If you remember, the conjugate is, if this is the given of a plus bi, then the conjugate is a minus bi. Okay? So it's always going to be an opposite sign of what you're given. Okay? So 24 plus, and so now they just use FOIL in the top, right? If you remember, FOIL is going on down here. So 24 plus 18i plus 8i plus 6i squared. We talked about this. You can just square this and square this, right? And we end up with 4 squared plus 3 squared. From there, we can move on and just simplify. 24 plus 26i plus 6 times negative 1 over 16 plus 9. We end up with 18 plus 26i over 25, or 18 25ths plus 26i over 25. Over here we have 5 minus I. Okay, so what's the conjugate of I, positive I? The conjugate of positive I is negative I, right? Because the bottom here, we could say that this is equal to 0. Oops, that doesn't want that. I don't want this yet. This can be written basically as 0 plus I, right? So the conjugate of that would be 0 minus I, okay? So we go ahead and we multiply, and we get negative 5i plus I squared over negative I squared. So negative 5i plus negative 1 over negative 1 becomes negative 5i minus 1 over 1, which is just negative 1 minus 5i. All right, now we want to talk about finding the powers of I. Okay, so because I squared is equal to negative 1, we can find larger powers of I as shown below. So basically, I cubed is I times I squared, which is I times negative 1 equals negative I. Okay, so I to the fourth is equal to I squared times I squared, which is negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. And you'll see a pattern that develops once we get to this point right here. We get right in this area here that they kind of just rotate through, right? 4, 5, 6, and 7. So it becomes 1i, negative 1, negative I. 1i, negative 1, negative I. So there's a little bit of a trick that you can apply if you want to just rotate through those factors, all right? So any factor of 4 is going to be 1, right? So let's take a look at this, I to the 28th. So we have I to the 28th is going to be I to the 4th to the 7th power, which is 1 to the 7th, which is 1. I to the 19th, that's I to the 16th times I cubed. If you remember, I cubed is equal to negative 1, right? So, or excuse me, negative I. That's what it was. That was the last one in the cycle. My bad. So 1 to the 4th times negative I, which is just negative I to the negative 9th. So this is now a fraction. So what we're going to end up doing with this situation is 1 over I to the 9th. So 1 over I to the 8th, well, I to the 8th is 1 times I, so it's 1 squared times I over, or 1 over I. And And since we don't want I in the denominator, now we have to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate of I, which is negative I. So we multiply that through, we get negative I over negative I squared, negative I over negative 1, which is positive 1, which becomes negative I. I to the negative 22nd power. So this is equal to 1 over I to the 22nd, which is equal to 1 over I to the 20th times I squared. Well, I to the 20th, as we talked about, is 1 to the 5th, or just 1, right? We know it's going to be 1. I squared is going to be negative 1, so 1 over negative 1 equals negative 1.
That's all, folks.
Let's prepare for that Chapter 8 test, guys.